Hello and welcome to the E-Talking podcast from Motion E, the place to be for in-depth content on Formula E, electric vehicles and sustainable transport, with articles as compelling and considered as an Alexander Sims radio message. It's an electric start to the season, and this edition of the podcast will discuss the events of the Diriyah E-Prix from Saudi Arabia, the first race of the Formula E season. If you want to read our latest features, go to motione.org. If you want to follow us on Twitter, it's motione.org, all one word. And if you find that you like this podcast enough to support what we're doing and get exclusive articles and more every month, then take a look at patreon.com/E_motionFE. Alright, with no further ado, I'm here with Conrad O'Keefe, eRacing.net's man on the live ticker and man on the race report during the weekend. How are you doing, Conrad?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you put in the how are you as well, given that Alexander Sims was our man of the weekend.
Yeah, he's a big talking point. Very, very big.
Yeah. And he, of course, the first thing he said after winning the race was, "Hello, Dario in the booth, how are you?" So I don't know how that man is so incredibly relaxed. He seems to take a different approach to racing to all the other drivers.
It's the glasses, Stuart. It's the glasses. I'm telling you, racing drivers with glasses are just a different breed. And I don't know if you saw, but at the end of race 2, when he won his first race, it's just peak Alexander Sims. And what makes me love that man so much is that he ended up running the wrong way on the podium, ended up going the wrong way, and then had to meekly travel back and go the right way again.
Yeah.
Which I thought was absolutely wonderful. He's just he doesn't take himself too seriously. He's incredibly polite and measured, but he's so wholesome and light-hearted. He's almost a symbol for Formula E in itself. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's incredibly wholesome. But at the same time, there's that ferocious edge, that drive to succeed.
I've said a few times, he comes across like a jolly airline pilot, and I mean that in the best possible way. He seems like the kind of person who could quite easily negotiate, a 40-kilometre gale while telling the passengers that the drinks will be served for another 5 minutes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd feel so much safer in those kind of situations with someone like Alexander Sims around.
Yeah.
He's incredibly calm, and to be honest, that's probably going to be a big help, assuming that BMW car's capable of this all season long, for keeping him in the title fight, because, I mean, he's in the hot seat right now. He's leading the standings after the first race, which is obviously, it goes without explanation, that's where you want to be. And it's a fairly healthy lead as well. I think it's 8 points he has over the second place driver. He's on 35 points, I know that much.
Yeah,
and I know it's a fairly healthy lead that he has, and yeah, if he keeps calm and composed and doesn't let things get to him, and I don't think Alex is that kind of person at all. He's inherited that team leader role, you could say, from Antonio Felix da Costa, who, as we know, travelled to Cheetah for pastures new. Alex is the de facto team leader there. If Maxi Gunter struggles with, not being quite as developed as Alex might have been, over many seasons in different categories, and Alex has had the best start.
Yeah.
He could well be in the hot seat for this.
And I think maybe some of us, including me, were surprised that Maxi Gunter wasn't immediately on the pace, given how fast he'd been in testing. But then, testing and racing are two very different things. And when you get to Diriyah, you've got so much to cope with that you don't have in Valencia. For example, the conditions of the track, the other cars driving more aggressively around you. Do you think that all weighed to a certain extent on Maxi Gunter's mind?
Yeah, I think it does, but to be honest, I don't think he's had any kind of slow start. I mean, I know that he was stripped to this in race 2, but before the penalties were applied, and they were deserved, by the way. He put together a solid race with plentiful pace. It was just his, you could say, inexperienced mistakes that cost him a strong result in race 2. But I think it's more a sign of just how on it Alex Sims was to take both poles. Still a fairly decent result in race 1 and the win in race 2. is just that was such a high bar for Maxi Gunter to meet, and it's kind of like putting the beat down on him early and showing who's boss. And Alex is a very kind guy, but he's let his racing do the talking. He's let the results do the talking instead of being brazen in the media and trying to get a psychological advantage. He's just going to let the results do that.
And how impressed have you been as well with the fact that he's just not taken it remotely personally that BMW didn't announce him until I think it was the middle of August or early September? He's just allowed his driving to do the talking there.
Yeah, Alex doesn't come across as a kind of guy who would be I won't call it bitterness, because I mean, in certain situations when drivers are announced very, very late, without much in the way of job security, because at the end of the day, this is still a job for them. And yeah, if they, make a comment, especially if they're asked in the media about the situation, then I don't think that's particularly bitterness. It's more deserved. But Alex isn't even the kind to kind of do that. He's just not grateful either, but happy that the situation's been resolved, and he doesn't want to focus on that. He just wants to focus on the future and a title fight, which is looking very, very possible because of his attitude, the way he's taken the role on. Hey, he might have came across pretty late, but I'm now BMW's experienced guy, and like the rate of progression that BMW Andretti have been on, like even in the Andretti stage 2, BMW taking over, it's promising signs that they could really, really fight for the big prizes this season.
Yeah, and it shows a trust on the part of BMW and the other manufacturers that we have so many, if you like, brand loyalists in each team. With BMW, we've got Alexander Sims, who also was the guy they trusted to go over and lead the team along with Antonio at the time when they took the M8s to Daytona and to Le Mans, for example. So he's had that trust from BMW for a long time, and I think that he's really stepped up, though, in a way that perhaps people who viewed his errors last season, viewed his lack of pace at certain circuits last season, weren't expecting. But it's looking as though now he's got that season's experience, and that maybe experience counts more than anything in Formula E. Yeah,
I feel like Alex Sims was kind of lumped into a bracket along with the likes of... One person that I tend to compare him to is Gary Paffett. They were both fairly similar. You could say that they both got chances with either a manufacturer that was about to come in the season after and it was an audition, or a manufacturer that had just come in and still had to, iron out teething issues and really get their feet under the rug. And Alex Sims and Gary Paffett, for a certain amount of time, were having a similar time of it, but it was Alex, in that kind of comparison, in that bracket of driver, that kicked on at the end, which ultimately convinced BMW that, yeah, this is a guy worth sticking with, especially after Da Costa left and Maxi Gunter came in. This is a guy who had a season's experience with us, has grown along the way. Whereas Gary, and to his credit, he tried very hard with HWA, but it was him that lost out in the end to the other big young gun in the series now in Nick De Vries. And that's kind of the contrast that I look at to show that Alex really saved his season from the gutter. And that's not an easy thing to do in any series, but especially in Formula E, where you have such a large driver intake. And yeah, he's very impressive.
Very impressive, and in a way, perhaps this progress that we saw started properly when he took pole in the first race in New York. That was last season, but that felt like he turned the corner to an extent. He obviously wasn't emotional about it because when is he publicly emotional about anything? But it just felt like he was showing to the world that he did have this ability that people who'd obviously stuck with him through the endurance days knew that he had, and that he was finally showing it.
Yeah, he definitely needed that last pole in New York. There was an air of disappointment that he wasn't able to hold on in the end for the win in that race, but looking back on it, it's aged a lot better. It's not going to be looked at as, like the final frontier and the final chance that wasn't taken. Instead, it's looked as, the seed that's grown into a tree's worth of podiums and wins that Alex can have. It's aged very, very well as that first pole, especially with the fact that those two other poles have come consecutively after that race, which is a great start for him. 3 poles in a row.
Yeah, we're both football fans. I'm a Liverpool fan, you're a West Ham fan, and so we, along with most fans of most clubs, quite often joke about Arsenal's plight. And in previous seasons under Arsene Wenger, there was this joke that I'm sure you're aware of, that they've won the 4th place trophy again.
Yeah.
And it felt to an extent like that with BMW last season and this season, as if they were sort of banking the pre-season trophy. I know that there's no prize money and no points on offer for doing well in pre-season, and of course they know that as well. But it felt like BMW Andretti again this season were going to be by a long way quickest in testing, but we're not going to be able to hold on due to development. And so I just wonder, is this the season where they finally hold on to things as other teams develop their cars and, as drivers gaining confidence? Will they hold on to that lead over, for example, title specialists like DS Techeetah and long game players like Lucas Di Grassi? Are they going to have the goods at Andretti, which has never won a title, to hold on to this now?
It's a promising start. They had a promising start last season as well. There was obviously the win in Diriyah last season from Da Costa, and then Marrakesh. It looked like there was going to be a 1-2 for only the second time in Formula E history, the first being Techeetah the season before, I believe it was Santiago. Yeah, it looked very, very promising, and both drivers looked in command. And then obviously there was the incident that led to Da Costa retiring and Sims finishing, I think it was 4th. And from then on, BMW lost their momentum. They were never terrible. They were always in and amongst the fight for podiums and wins, but they weren't able to string it together in enough fashion to be able to hold on to their advantage, because Techeetah breezed past them. Techeetah really breezed past everyone once Jean-Eric Vergne hit his stride, which is going to be a major worry this season as well. Is the first consecutive and multiple world champion driver in Formula E has had a tricky time of it in Diriyah this season. It was scored no points, but you never know when they'll be able to come back. Audi, can never count them out. They've been the most consistent Formula E team since the series started. Nissan had a very, very messy time of it, but with Seb Buemi's win right at the death in New York, there's a chance that they can start to string together a bit more than they showed last season.
Yeah, no, I want to stop. I want to stop with Nissan because they obviously have had far more to do over the pre-season than most other teams. Given that, okay, they were developing that new single motor powertrain before it was out, before the twin motor was outlawed last season. For people just catching up to Formula E, Nissan were the only team to bring in a twin motor powertrain in season 5 last season. And the other teams, along with Nissan, mutually decided that that would not be allowed for this season to try not to create a massive high-budget arms race in terms of powertrain development. So Nissan had far more to do in terms of getting that ready, at least. And yet they don't have the phenomenal qualifying pace they did, but they seem to be on the pace of the leading teams in the race, don't they?
Yeah, Nissan had a very, very shaky time of it last season. It's just any kind of momentum, they weren't able to build it up. They had plenty of flashpoints and they had plenty of chances to turn the corner, but it just never came together for them. And out of the, you could say, elite teams, the teams that you would expect to be regularly fighting for wins and podiums, there wasn't a spark that really got Nissan going like there was for some of the others, especially Techeetah in the second half of the season, and that cost them big time. But I also feel like it was a learning process, one that they'll definitely use for this season, even with regards to the technological shake-up that they've been very, very affected by. They've got Oliver Rowland settled into the team as well, which is a major, major boost. Having Oliver settled into a team, but completely up to pace with Formula E, to be able to supplement the bags of experience and pedigree that Seb Wemi has. So the lineup's become stronger with that, and we'll have to see whether the car and whether the team can become as well.
Yeah, in many ways, Oliver Rowland's progress through motorsport is something of a throwback, because drivers without oodles of money or some kind of junior scheme don't tend to get to the upper echelons these days. And if they do, as with Alexander Sims, they run out of money and then, are quite correctly backed by a manufacturer because of their pedigree. But Oliver Rowland's had to do it pretty much on his own until the last couple of seasons, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's had it incredibly difficult. He's been at crisis points in several times in his career. GP2, he was struggling to sustain that and ran out of budget. He was with Williams in 2018, but he was kind of there as more of a sim driver than anything else. He was never considered for the race seat properly, which is a massive shame because Oliver's an incredible driver. I mean, that's not even me talking through bias at him being from the same county as I am. It's just fact. He's impressed in Formula Renault. He's impressed in GP2. He's now impressed in Formula E. He's proven himself wherever he goes, and Nissan made the right decision in keeping him on, especially after that first season when he wasn't expected to be racing for them and got the opportunity when Alex Albon left for Toro Rosso after being announced. And he's just incredible. He's dealt with it so very well to come in at that late notice with a team that through the entirety of that season were struggling to get any kind of momentum together. And he's really proven himself, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get his first win this season.
Alex Albon leaving Nissan a few weeks before the season to join Toro Rosso, and then joining Red Bull, and Oliver Rowland joining Nissan and becoming arguably the breakthrough driver of last season. You don't get much better butterfly effects than that, do you, in motorsport?
Yeah, it was a real feel-good domino effect, because look at Alex now, he's flying. Look at Oliver now, he's flying. And both drivers are notorious for having struggled through their junior careers for opportunities and for funds. And look at both of them now, they're both with manufacturers, and it's incredible.
Although, having said that, Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly have, of course, had intersecting careers this season. And I noticed that you were speculating with a few people about when Gasly would return to Formula E. Do you think that's something that we can look forward to later in his career after he's really proven a point at Toro Rosso and maybe other teams?
It's something that'll probably take another 10 years to happen, but I do feel like he will come back. He enjoyed his experience in New York at the end of season 3. Took 7th and 4th place in those 2 races, so he had the results to back it up at first time of asking. Yeah, I don't see a reason why he wouldn't come back later in his career once he's done everything he needs to do in Formula 1. I don't think he'd hang up the gloves just after that on. I don't particularly see him ending up in, say, IndyCar or potentially Super Formula, because he's done that too. He may go back there because he's got a lot of goodwill with Japanese fans and Honda. Pierre's almost becoming kind of like Jenson Button in a way, that unofficial Honda ambassador.
Well, he had that relationship with Honda from Super Formula, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and they really struck a chord because of how impressive his Super Formula season was. It's not often that a rookie driver from European Series goes over there and not only challenges for a title, but takes it to within 1 point and misses out on the final chance to actually take it outright. So, yeah, that built up quite a rapport. But, yeah, I don't see a reason why Pierre wouldn't opt for Formula E sometime in the future. Very distant, but I could see him ending up back here.
And I am going to ask this because you're the person who knows the most about Pierre Gasly of anyone I know. Now, obviously, a mutual friend of both of ours, Josh Wilcock, is currently knee-deep in an autobiography he's writing of Bruno Giacomelli, which he refuses to release excerpts from until it's finished, although it will be available online soon, we're told.
Yeah.
I think it's perfectly acceptable, at least these days, to be a journalist and a fan. I would definitely consider writing the autobiography of quite a few drivers active at the moment. If Pierre were to need an autobiography, quick, within 3 months, perhaps he's challenging for a title at some point, would you step in and do the business?
Oh, absolutely. I'd be his hype man all of the way, as long as he asks. If I wasn't asked, then I probably wouldn't get round to that with the same kind of dedication Josh is able to put in with Bruno Giacomelli, but I'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who has as much dedication to anything as Josh has for Bruno. He's all in.
It is incredible, and of course, if we mock it, then we miss the point that Bruno Giacomelli...
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Bruno Giacomelli was a genuinely good driver as well, who was unlucky to miss out on Formula One wins. So it's not exactly like we're talking, I don't know, a UGI idea. We're talking a good driver.
But I mean, Bruno Giacomelli, even now, could step into a Formula E car and be one of the fastest drivers. I think that's indisputable.
I'd love to see it. I would love to see it. I'd love to see Bruno just take those gloves back off the mantelpiece for one more time and give it a go in fully electric cars.
And public call out as well, Josh. When you believe you've got the manuscript done to Autobiomelli, please do come on the podcast and plug it. And me and Conrad would love to ask you about the book. Okay, so that's a public call out. Josh Wilcock, we want you on the podcast. Anyway, so moving on to the race format. That double-header format, I mean, it was tiring for journalists, I'm sure you agree, but it was something else for fans. Really, considering that we don't have another race for another 7 weeks, that was the festival of Formula E that we all were crying out for, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, the only reason it was unfortunate for me is because I was in a time zone that meant I had to wake up at times of like 3 a.m, 4 a.m. to be able to do practice reports, but let's be real, being in Europe, it doesn't happen all that often, and fans elsewhere have it a lot worse, so I can stomach it. And I incredibly like the series format. It's balanced out in the right way between races that are only one event across one day, which I think is fantastic. I like it when it's condensed like that instead of a three-day weekend like Formula One, because the Fridays just go by so slowly. If the practice sessions are eventful like they were in, say, Baku, you can feel a bit of a drag, and FP3 just feels entirely unnecessary. There's not a part of Formula E's 1 race or 2 race per weekend schedules that feel like that. Every session feels necessary and it feels engaging. Yeah, it's just I think it works very well. There's definitely criticisms like the practice sessions. I feel like the first one is the right length, but the second practice session shouldn't be half an hour, it should be 45 minutes, but that's a minor gripe. Everything else has just been, it's been very enjoyable. Diriyah has served up eventful practice sessions, eventful qualifying, with a lot of expectation and a lot of intrigue as to who's going to be on pace and who's not. Yeah, it's worked out very well.
And actually, Formula E is the only sport that I've ever followed, and I've followed a few, where you feel even in the first free practice session where there's no stakes whatsoever, it's still worth tuning in for to see what happens, because there is usually somebody who struggles, somebody who, gets a bit offline in the massive amounts of dust. And maybe this is the beauty of a city street circuit, but when we had Diriyah first practice, it was there appeared to be genuine jeopardy in terms of would the cars make it round in one piece, because there was just so much sand and so much dust from the previous year of the track not being raced on. Does this kind of thing make free practice 1 and 2, more exciting than maybe an F1 practice session would be for you?
Well, the things that make Formula E practice sessions more exciting than F1 practice sessions are these reasons for me. Firstly, the commentary. I absolutely love listening to the likes of Jack Nicholls and Dario Franchitti, who are absolutely world class at what they do. It's as simple as that. They are world class. They have it down to a T. But even forgetting commentary, because that changes wherever you are. Formula One has a length of an hour and a half for practice sessions. Well, FP1 and 2 anyway. Whereas Formula E practice sessions, well, FP1 is half that length. FP2 is a third, which is a lot more stomachable for a practice session, I feel. Not necessarily right, because for the teams it's a struggle to have less time out there on track. But for a fan, it's a lot more palatable. And it just makes it more of an event to have a bit less time in practice sessions, and you don't have the risk of it dragging on. And then there's also the fact that Formula One practice sessions are more eventful when they're on street circuits because of the high risk, high reward that you've pointed out. The suspense and intrigue: is anyone going to end up in the wall? Is it going to be hard to navigate? Formula E races on street circuits, that's its thing. So it's that all the time, which really helps.
Yeah, and I would say one of the issues that was brought up and which continues to divide people was attack mode and fan boost. Start with attack mode. There is the issue which we've always had ever since attack mode came in, of where the zones are placed, and I think last season they obviously it was the first race with attack mode when they went to Diriyah last season, but there was some excitement as some of the drivers missed the zone, proving that it was difficult to get in there, which was good. This season it was like they made it too difficult, so drivers had to slow down on a really slow corner much earlier than they would do to get into line for the zone. When Buemi did that during the race, Sebastian Buemi, Antonio Felix da Costa got a penalty for running into the back of him, when you could argue Buemi effectively gave da Costa a brake test without meaning to, and that was what da Costa actually said, because he was lining up for that attack mode zone. Do you think that, bearing in mind that, and also the fact that drivers were overtaken while engaging attack mode under a safety car on the final lap after it had gone in, when the race still wasn't live, does all this mean that we need to look at not placing an attack mode zone directly before the start-finish line?
We need to look at many things for attack mode, because while it is a brilliant addition to the series, undoubtedly it's had a great effect on racers and shaking up the order, it's not implemented in the way it could be. Like you said, the implementation, the detection point in Diriyah this season was laughably bad to me. It made no sense, and it was almost inevitable that it was going to lead to an accident like what da Costa and Buemi had. Wasn't really either of their faults, because Buemi had to do that. It's how he had to engage attack mode, and for da Costa, it's very, very unfortunate. Nothing really he could do. It's attack mode when it's engaged on a straight, when you take a different line on a straight, is probably the best implementation for, well, it's definitely the best implementation for safety, but it's the least pleasing on the eye to the fans, and there's the least chance of an order being shaken up if they can, manage to send one down the inside and regain the place, or have enough of a power boost to gain it back later in the lap. Might make it a little bit less intriguing, so I understand why they're trying to put attack mode activation points on corners. And some implementations have actually been quite clever. There's some longer corners where they'll put it on the outside line and you have to take a wider line, but then you'll see drivers do that. They'll lose a bit less time, so they'll still be behind that, fairly behind the car that's just passed them. And because they've taken a wider line, they'll get a better exit and more speed down to the next corner, which could then lead to opportunities for them to instantly gain back that position and go on a charge. Or we've seen it plenty of times where there's cars with attack mode that have just been bottled up behind other cars, but it's not like F1 bottled up behind other cars. Something can happen, and it's very, very interesting when they have attack mode and they don't manage to pull it off, and then suddenly the question is, well, that attack mode's gone now and they're still in the same place. and there's other drivers behind them that are going to take their attack mode, and they've just gone from being the hunter to the hunted.
Yeah, definitely very exciting. And you were saying before the podcast that you felt that Fan Boost still has a role to play, and in fact did play a role during the race. And I would say it did, but I would also say that there is now so much long-standing hatred and innuendo towards Fan Boost that it almost makes its position untenable going forward past this season. And I don't feel Fan Boost is long for this world. I feel that it is an innovation that still gets talked about positively outside of Formula E. But the Formula E fans, I think, feel that it is a distraction from the actual racing and from the pure racing, in inverted commas, going on elsewhere. And that now we have attack mode with a larger power allocation for it. It is actually not needed. Before we come on to that, I mean, the innuendo has been going on for a long time. I mean, does the fact that there's so much innuendo around Fan Boost and how it's actually cultivated, whether that's true or not, does that mean that now it's in a difficult position in terms of trying to keep it in the future?
Well, my particular stance on it is that it's fine for now. It's fine for now. For this season in particular, if we're talking longer term, then yeah, Fan Boost is long in the tooth, I agree. It's got a lot of bad blood, bad history. The engagement side of it is probably dwindling in impact, while still useful because a lot of people who follow Formula E still engage with Fan Boost. It's not so key for attracting people to the series as a main attraction, a main selling point that this is your chance to be a part of this series in a way that you wouldn't be with others. It's not the selling point it once was. But then there's also been issues with bots in the past. There's been investigations that I only found out recently, actually, because it coincided with a time in which I barely really watched the races throughout seasons 2 and 3, where there was a lot of talk about an investigation about how Fan Boost worked. It's tarred. Its legacy is tarred with that, and with attack mode being as intriguing as it is, although it is not by any means not ironed out, that stands as a successor to the point where they might not necessarily have to be a replacement for Fan Boost, that they can find a completely different, unique way of getting fan votes or fan interaction into Formula E in a different way, while attack mode is that big, the speed boost in Formula E races.
If you want to find out more about attack mode and Fan Boost, if you're new to Formula E and you find some of this a bit perplexing, then head over to motione.org. I've just written an article about the basics of Formula E, the things that everyone should know, and the things that people most ask before they watch a race. Hopefully, if you read through that guide and take a look at some of the really useful videos that the FIA and Formula E made a few seasons ago, then that should explain really well some of the basics of the sport. Conrad, when you started following Formula E, did you find any aspects of it confusing? I certainly did, but how did you feel about it?
Surprisingly not. I started following it right at the start in Season 1. The 2 cars thing that we had with the Gen 1 cars, for anyone who doesn't know, the Gen 1 cars, which lasted for Seasons 1 to 4, were the first generation. They were less advanced than the ones we have now, and they were also not able to do races on a full charge, so half-time or whenever drivers decided they needed to, and teams, they would swap cars and jump into another one, which became a key part of the races, like jumping out of the cars, getting into them as quickly as possible. That second car is what they'd finish the race with. That was fairly easy to get my head around because there wasn't really much to it other than this car can't make it to the end. So this car will take you to the end once you've hopped out of the first one and hopped into the second one. It was weird, certainly, but I could get my head around it. The street circuits, I mean, yeah, all street circuits is fine. Electric cars, again, fine once you get used to the fact that there's not no noise, but less noise. That's easy to get your head around. Anything that I might have found a bit confusing was probably the penalties and how that works, and just different standards of officiating to what I might be used in series like Formula One, because it's a different animal. It's Formula E racing, but Formula One.
Standards of officiating brings me to something else. Now, I'm going to be really diplomatic here, because I know that Scott Elkins, the Formula E race director, follows a lot of Formula E independent sites, including this one. And I think that generally the Formula E stewards and race direction team do a great job, but there was an error that took place during the second Diriyah race, where a tractor was still removing, I think it was Robin Frines's car, off the track, and the race direction team appeared to let the race to go ahead. This must have happened because they didn't realise in time that the tractor was there, presumably. Or is there another explanation, do you think?
I probably agree with you on that. I'm not going to say that it was done because of complete... I mean, when those situations arise, it is error of some point, but I'm not going to say it's much more than that. What I am going to say, though, is how it has to be handled after. Is that it has to be accepted as an incredibly bad error of judgment, because it was. Those kind of situations, it is the damage it can cause, and drivers' lives are at risk in situations like those. And unfortunately, in the past, albeit under different circumstances to that, but dangerous all the same, we've seen drivers lose their lives because of machinery on track during
of course
conditions, and when they're green lighted conditions, it's a lot worse. But as long as it's accepted that it's a bad error of judgment, and that it's learned from, and that it cannot happen again, and that standards are put in place and enforced, that things can be done differently in future, then that's all they can learn, and that's all they can do from this point onwards. And learning's a key of making sure the series improves.
After that discussion, we reached out to the FIA race director, Scott Elkins, for a quote or a statement about what happened when the tractor was left on track and the race went green after the safety car period. Scott was very kind to come back to us very quickly with a statement, so I'm going to read it out now. Scott says, "It was a communication error from the marshals. They said we were good to go, and then the tractor got stuck on something and could not back all the way in, so we went full course yellow. We were not happy about it, but it is good that we have tools like full course yellow to slow the field quickly and allow them to travel safely past the incident. Ideally, we would have kept the safety car out for one more lap, but we also have to have trust in the marshal's judgment. Unfortunately, in this case, that trust didn't work." So, thank you very much to Scott Elkins, the FIA race director for Formula E races, for coming back with that comment. Moving on, we have a slight rules uncertainty, because the rules over the points for that people got for qualifying have changed this season. Now, I thought, and it turns out a few other people on the social media Twitter sphere thought the same thing, that actually everyone who topped a group, as in Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4, got a point. It turns out not. So it turns out you don't get a point for beating the Dragons and Neo 333s. You get a point for topping all of the groups, for being the top driver before Superpole. So this is a bit of a weird addition to the points tally, and in fact Hazel Southwell said that she thought that this seemed like something that might have been sponsored in previous seasons. What's your view on this new gimmick, Conrad?
That's a very fair comment from Hazel, because it feels like something that you'd expect to see instead of points as an award given in the Premier League from a sponsor of the series. It feels like more of a marketing opportunity than something that's particularly needed within within the sport when we've also got
perhaps the
points for pole.
Perhaps the Coleman's English Mustard Moderately Hot trophy or something.
Yeah, certainly. It's the 1 point that can be earned that just feels quite unnecessary, to be honest. That it made more sense if it was a point for each group, because, I mean, you don't need the initiative for it in doing as well as you can in qualifying. It's not like an initiative that you might need in Formula 1 where there's teams that will willfully stay in Q2. But everyone's fighting to get into Superpole in Formula E because there's no disadvantage to it. But for teams saying Group 1, the consolation in Group 1 when you go out first and you might not make Superpole because it's hard to do so, is that they get a point for their troubles if they at least top that group. And then for Group 4, there's a chance for Neo or Dragon to potentially top their group. Group 4 has had some history of, even though they technically go out on the track when it's at the best conditions, they still don't tend to make it because they have a hard time getting good results. So a point for them could mean a lot as well. Whereas both those groups are disadvantaged if it's a point for overall fastest time before Superpole, because I suspect that will probably go to drivers in Group 2 or 3.
Yes, and I think we might see a greater tactical engagement in terms of drivers attempting to get themselves into Group 2 this season. So I wouldn't mind betting that if a driver is on the cusp of being 6th in the championship rather than 7th, we might actually see him letting through somebody just to be in Group 2 for the following session. Is it for the following races session? Is this something you can anticipate as well?
It sounds very tinfoil hat, but honestly, I don't think I'd rule it out, because we've seen the complaints in qualifying from the drivers, and Group 2 and Group 3 being in those two groups is key. Absolutely key. I would not be surprised to see that. Not every driver doing that. I think there's a fair few drivers who wouldn't even entertain that idea. But there's a couple I suspect would potentially do it if this situation arose. But yeah, back to the point system is that 3 points for Superpole, topping Superpole and taking the pole, is a great addition. The point for fastest lap, also a great addition, because it's had, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, the Season 2 title showdown depended on the fastest lap. That was what decided the title. So it's definitely got history of having an impact in Formula E. But the point for topping the standings before Superpole, that's not to me as important as it would have been for getting a point for every group. It's not the pole that it could have been.
Yeah. And in fact, the points discussion and the points confusion was an example of just about the only thing Nick De Vries, Mr. Perfect, has got wrong since he entered Formula E. He wrote on Twitter how glad he was to get a point, I think it was, for his group performance, and Jean-Eric Verne replied, "That's not quite how it works, I'm afraid." So I think what made it more surprising was that Nick De Vries is such a polished chap, and he almost seems like Michael Schumacher when he first came into Formula One. It's like he's not real sometimes, and for him to get wrong anything to do with rules, it just, I don't know, it seemed like the class SWAT getting something wrong almost, didn't it?
Yeah, Nick's been exemplary since he's been announced for the Mercedes role in Formula E, and his week in Diriyah, although he didn't score points in race 2, what an incredible debut. To get
Absolutely.
6th in the first race and to be fighting in amongst the contenders for a podium, Nick's going to have a good time in Formula E, because he has got the talent for it, and he's got the application. All he needs is the slices of luck that any Formula E driver needs, and I don't think his inexperience is going to be too important. I think he's probably going to be one of the most impressive rookies we've seen in any series in any time.
Well, yes. Talking of impressive rookies, Mercedes have just come into their first season proper as a Formula E team, having dipped their toe into the water with HWA Race Lab last season. And Nick de Vries was not the only one to put in stunning performances all weekend. Stoffel van Dorn was right on it and got 2 P3s in the end. Now, Mercedes, throughout testing, were saying we don't expect to be right on it in the first race right away. Everybody, all of the Formula E pundits were saying they don't expect them to be among multiple wins this season. Maybe they'll sneak one or two. And then they go and do this. Mercedes sandbagging and then doing well in races. It's not something we've ever seen in Formula One, is it?
No, it's something we've never come across, ever. But
is it something where actually we can look at it and say, no, they've been completely dialed in the whole time and this will be a Mercedes dominance eventually?
I'm going to say no. Anyone who's read my e-racing notebook will know that my stance on Formula E in general is that domination is just not a part of it. At least not yet, and not for the time being. Because there's been plenty of flashpoints where teams have had a chance to exert dominance, but I've never been able to because of just the series DNA and how it works, and the fact that the cars are fairly similar to each other, and that the drivers are so competitive, and that every team struggles with getting momentum together in a series so chaotic and enticing as Formula E. And I don't see that being the case for Mercedes to suddenly dominate, or Porsche for that instance, because Porsche had an impressive start to life with Andrea Lotter's podium in race 1.
Oh gosh, yeah, so, yeah. Porsche looked genuinely slow compared to the top runners in testing as well. So that, in a way, was more of a surprise than Mercedes doing well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Lotterer was on the charge at the end of that first race as well. There was wonderers there was wondering that maybe he'd be able to overtake Bird for the win because he was the one that was charging hardest throughout the latter stages of that race. So Porsche had a very good time of it as well. And I don't think either of them are going to dominate for quite some time, at least. Just like anyone else. I don't think Techeetah will. Because, I mean, Techeetah have got off to the worst start to be able to do that anyway. Audi, even with Lucas Di Grassi's podium in race 2, which is a very impressive result, but by Audi standards, because of how high they've set the bar, it's not star-studded for them as a manufacturer over those 2 races to have one podium. And yeah, Nissan, I don't know. History suggests no, they won't dominate. It just doesn't seem like any likely candidate. BMW don't seem like a likely candidate either, because in race 1 we saw Alex Sims drop away from pole and end up in 5th, I believe it was, which makes you think maybe BMW could have a repeat of that in races where they fall back from really, really top results. Yeah, Formula E doesn't do domination, and we don't have to worry for quite some time about Mercedes dominating, but we can expect podiums from them and wins because they're a capable outfit. They've had that season with HWA, getting used to the workings of Formula E and preparing for a full manufacturer entry, which has obviously proven out to be a masterstroke. They've got 2 very capable drivers, and they could win the titles, but there's a difference between winning and dominating. Techeetah have won the past 2 drivers' titles and past teams' title after agonisingly missing out in season 4, but they've not been domination. They've just been a couple of close wins that have been entertaining, fully deserved, but not streets ahead.
Now that Venturi have taken on the Mercedes customer powertrain, is there any possibility that after they've got that dialed in, after they've got used to it properly, we might see them putting in the sorts of performances that Envision Virgin have been with the Audi powertrain?
I'm gonna suspect no, because Virgin have been very impressive in season 5 and starting off in season 6. They've always been a team that's been right up there at the head of the championship, whereas Venturi haven't really had that success.
Hmm.
So history suggests no, unless Poncherry can pull something out of the bag, which can always happen. You never know. But the signs don't look too good. But the Mercedes powertrain will certainly help them out. It's a good powertrain, and they'll have some consistency with that in future. And they've got drivers in Mortara and Massa who are capable of good results when the situations arise. But for now and for the foreseeable future, it's probably going to be grabbing opportunistic podiums and wins rather than getting onto Virgin's level.
Something I wrote in my post-race essay after Diriyah was that I felt that it was getting harder and harder for the small teams to challenge the big teams, by which I mean the manufacturer or manufacturer-backed teams. Envision Virgin continue to do a stellar job with that customer Audi powertrain, and it's partly, I think, because of, like you say, that history of winning. It does develop, and it's just always there to back you up if you have a pedigree. It's perhaps actually more difficult for BMW I Andretti, given that they have the pressure of winning for a manufacturer, but not the pedigree to say that they could have done it without them. Whereas you get the feeling that whoever was powering the Virgin, it would have done well.
Yeah, Virgin, basically Formula E's version of Red Bull when they had the Renault engines. That one customer team that, in amongst manufacturer might, that has just run rampant throughout motorsport, has been able to keep their head in the title fight and be able to take race wins fairly regularly for a private team. And yeah, I suspect that will be the case for a long time yet, because Virgin are such a slick organisation and we're able to build incredible cars. But I see your point about it becoming harder and harder, because look at Neo and Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
They were able to get better results in the past than they are now. But I feel like in Formula E's case, that is because of so much breadth of manufacturer might in the sport now. There's more than there's ever been. And it looks set to grow even more and more because Formula E is the height of relevance for road car technologies right now in motorsport. So it's inevitable that we'll see more manufacturers in time. We might see some leave, like Renault did, to focus on other efforts, mainly their flailing F1 team.
Mm.
That's been embroiled in, Groundhog Day for Renault in cheating scandals, but it's harder. It's harder for the likes of Neo and Dragon, not necessarily Virgin, because they've got the tools to be able to keep up. But yeah, for the smallest teams in Formula E, for the first time, there is starting to become a truly noticeable big gap.
And it was noticeable, not just for Neo 333, who I think we knew would struggle, and I think who they themselves have admitted they would struggle, but also for Dragon and Brendan Hartley, who I'm told by people who know him better than I do is a tough guy. Seems to have that sort of harrowed, haunted expression that he had on at times at Toro Rosso again, particularly when he was interviewed and said, well, I always told you it was going to be hard. And I'm not sure he thought it was going to be this hard, though. Dragon obviously had a good driver pairing last season, Pachito Lopez and Max Gunter. This season they've got Hartley and Nico Muller, and yet they struggled badly in that first race. Is it just a question of having two rookies in Formula E, admittedly people who've tested a lot, who just don't have that data of and that experience of racing? Or what can Dragon do to get back into the top 10?
What Dragon can do is give their drivers patience, which there wasn't that much on offer of last season when it came to Maxi Gunter. Different arguments can be made for the axing of Lopez and how deserved that was, which I say was a fair decision. But the treatment of Maxi Gunter was very, very stop-start and didn't help matters. But yeah, Dragon need to stick with Hartley and Muller because they're both very capable drivers. Hartley has won many things, and not so long ago was in Formula One taking points finishers with Toro Rosso. So he's definitely got it. So does Nico. What Dragon need to do is focus on the team organisation and make sure they're as balanced and sensible as they can be. They need to be a well-oiled machine if they want to start climbing the grid. It has to be like that from top to bottom. When it comes to the drivers, and you suggested they might not have realised the scale of the challenge that they've taken on, I agree. I feel like for both Hartley and Muller, it might have looked like a case of here's a team that's not too far away from challenging, but they've just had a really messy time of it. It's been a annus horribilis worth of errors, and with us guys in there and a car that should be okay for getting some opportunistic results, we can start to build a team again. But it's a lot harder, and I think the job that Lopez and Gunter and even Felipe Nasr were trying to do in that team last season has been underestimated.
Yeah, and are we going to see the gap increasing? And if so, what can we do to encourage privateer teams to, continue to? I mean, obviously the franchise slots are full now, but should we be doing anything to encourage privateers into Formula E? My personal view is that we don't want Formula E to become another Formula One where all teams are manufacturers or satellite manufacturer teams. And even worse, we don't want a World Sports Car Championship 1990s situation where the manufacturers threaten to pull out, and then leave the sport with a handful of cars. I very much hope that something is done to encourage to encourage privateers to come through in some form of electric racing second division. Now, this will take time to build up, and it's not the work of tomorrow, but I wrote an article last season about how Formula E needs a second division and how you can have a very limited summer programme on city street circuits not used by Formula E, which could involve teams not in Formula E, maybe, Prema and that sort of level of team from Formula 2 could run cars based on an old based on Gen 1 as it is now, or based on Gen 2 when that's replaced by Gen 3. Could a second division of Formula E work, or is it pie in the sky? And if so, what else could work as a brainstorm to keep privateers interested?
Different tiers of Formula E would be quite costly, and I don't think that's going to be considered anytime soon as a possibility, and I wouldn't disagree with that being the case. Manufacturers are important for Formula E because they have become a pull for the sport. It can't be denied, but the privateers are very important as well and have to be given the opportunity to thrive in the series in a case that Formula 1 struggles with. But the one key thing that Formula 1 has over Formula E in this regard is that now that gap has started to open up in Formula E between the haves and the have-nots, although it's not as big to the point of crisis, it's growing. There's no denying it, and that happens in motorsport when you have big money playing a factor. You can only stave it off for so long. But Formula 1 have quite a few privateer teams or manufacturers that are underperforming, say, like, you could say Renault being in that midfield gap, and then there's the investment of Toro Rosso, but they're kind of meant to be there. Then you've got other privateer teams. There's like Alfa Romeo, which is Alba deep down, Racing Point, Williams. There's quite a few. Whereas when you look at Formula E, you've got Dragon, Neo, Venturi can be seen as part of that, and yeah, it's a bit smaller within that gap, and there's more manufacturers in place, which means that there's less points on offer if all those manufacturers hook it up as intended. What needs to be put in place is just rules, regulations, and caps on spending that mean that the privateer teams can compete and that there's no lasting advantage. That goes on for seasons and seasons. That ends up with the situation Formula One's at right now, where it's having to undo a lot of the decisions made in the Eccleston era to try and bring some competitive nature back to the sport.
Well, the Eccleston era brings me on to what will perhaps be the final topic, which is I'm going to go here into difficult territory. Now, obviously, Formula E's just been to Saudi Arabia. Lots of people have an issue with Formula E going to Saudi Arabia. The fact that just after that happened, the Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro signed a letter of intent that he'd like an E-Prix in Rio just means that that kind of dictum of sticking to sports doesn't quite apply anymore. And we have got a situation now where around the world, increasing numbers of populist presidents and governments are coming into power. How do we as motorsport journalists, but also motorsport fans, how do we handle it when, you know, we want the accreditation, we want to get to races, and yet we want to disagree with endorsing the regimes of people we don't necessarily agree with?
It's an important issue to raise, and the attitudes and policies in Saudi Arabia are ones that I have strong disagreements with, to the point of quite heated views, which I will tone back on here. But
no, there's no need to tone it back. If it's too fiery, I'll just edit it later. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. One thing I do want to say though is that it's like there's two different ways I'd look at it. There was the Eurovision was held in Israel this year, and a lot of people boycotted that. And the reason for people boycotting that, well, for some people anyway, the ones that weren't already going to do that, is because the Palestinian people called for us to do that, said that they need us to be able to shun these events, showing a support to them. It would matter a lot. In those kind of situations, yes, you boycott. It's your responsibility to listen to them and to follow what they say and boycott. Whereas in the case of Diriyah, while there are protests going on, there hasn't been a massively wide scale call for people travelling there as part of Formula E media to boycott that event. And that's where I start to feel that yes, you can travel there and you can still not be morally compromised, because at the end of the day, when those events are taking place, that can also be quite an inspiration for people who are there having to live under oppressive regimes to have a point in their year or in their life where they get to see this event rock up. They get to see people from different backgrounds and different ways of life being able to, be able to hold an event and to be able to spread joy to them that they might not have otherwise. And there's a lot of people that can look towards these events and see it as quite progressive and hopeful even. Not necessarily the race and how it's funded, because that's certainly not. But to see the people taking part in it, the drivers, the team staff, the journalists, will have, definitely the vast majority of them will have some very high moral standing. And it could be quite an inspiration for the people there in that country or in that nation to be able to see that happen in nearby. So one person that I would advise that you definitely listen to on these kind of issues is Hazel Southwell. She's been on this podcast before, and I cannot recommend following her content enough, but I know that she's preparing a piece based on this kind of discussion, and it is a must read because she's incredibly qualified to comment on this, much more so than I ever am. So yeah, she's been there before.
And, commercial sensibilities say I shouldn't plug the competition, but in her case, I'm going to. Inside Electric, it's a new website. It's an independent Formula E website. And, Hazel and Rob Watts and Katie Fairman and Peter Leung have been working incredibly hard on that site. And they should be very proud of what they've created. I've also been working very hard on creating Motion E, but, they are two very different publications, and they're doing, I think, over there at Inside Electric, they're doing a fine job of covering the side of Formula E that definitely didn't get covered in previous seasons. So fair play to them, and really looking forward to Hazel's piece, like you are, on Saudi Arabia, because it's something I've asked her a lot of questions about, and I'm sure that you have as well. But what you can tell someone in a potted 10 minutes of, you can do this, you can do that. It's a lot different to what you can tell somebody after hours of thinking about it and writing about it, several hundred words, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, I just don't feel that because I've not travelled there in my life. I'm definitely at a disadvantage to be able to talk about this clearly and give it the attention it deserves compared to someone like Hazel, who's been there and also has been in journalism for a longer time. She can articulate it a lot better. And also, I just add on to what Stuart said, make sure to check out Inside Electric. The likes of Hazel, Katie, Rob, Peter, they've all been working very, very hard on this, and their site deserves to thrive just like eMotion does. And but both can definitely coexist and produce some incredible content like there already has been.
Oh yeah, and talking of incredible content, Conrad, your race notebook was excellent.
Thank you.
Will you be covering every race as the sort of Ted's Notebook type reporter this season?
Yes, the plans that I've got for it are a notebook for every race. I was going to do 2 different notebooks for Diriyah for race 1 and 2, but unfortunately, conditions like I was incredibly busy meant I had to compress that just into one big one. So for double headers, I will probably do 2 of them. In fact, for London, because I will actually be there, I will be there as accreditation. Is I want to actually do a live video notebook as much as I can do anyway, as the best emulation of TED I can do, where I kind of give back as a as a live stream for people to be able to throw questions in at that time, and another one at the end of the season where I give the power to the fans of Formula E, where instead of me asking them for questions and answering them, they ask me for questions and I answer them.
That's a brilliant idea, and I think you should keep on doing the kind of more frivolous fun side of things as well, which I know that you've been doing a bit of. That part of your notebook where you discussed how Jean-Eric Verne and Pascal Wehrlein's hairstyles appear to be getting better and better every season. It was something that really hit home right here.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a bit of fun. It's supposed to be wholesome. These kind of questions, like in serious pieces that are so often seen in motorsport, they don't get answered. So I kind of want to create something that's a bit more fun, a bit more laid back, while also not crossing any boundaries. It'll be wholesome stuff.
Saying that, and I know that you are a part-time man bun user yourself. Is the man bun, as sported by Pascal Wehrlein, going to be viewed in a positive light in 20 years' time, or do you think when we get to the 2010s revival party, it's going to be the thing that people put a wig on as an ironic statement?
I don't actually have a man bun. I just use a headband. It's an Alice band that I use, okay. So I'm not quite the same as Pascal, but Pascal's definitely rocking it. I've been assured by someone I know who works at Mahindra that the curly hair is still there and present underneath that bun, so whenever he decides to abandon that idea, that's there to be his go-to as a hair rehabilitation. But yeah, I definitely see man buns and new hair styles being a common theme within motorsport as well as everywhere else. We've seen the likes of Lewis Hamilton do it to great effect because he's rocked some incredible styles over the past few years. We've seen countless footballers do it, some to some good degrees, to some genuinely awful. Thinking of Brazilian Ronaldo and Neymar's noodle hair, that was a particular low point.
I think the low point for Brazilian Ronaldo was probably the third eyebrow, to be honest.
Yeah.
You remember that in 2002 World Cup?
Yeah, legend has it he had that hairstyle because he wanted to take the attention away from any injuries or lack of form he was carrying going into that tournament. So he decided to rock a deliberately bad hairstyle to get everyone to focus on that instead, which worked for him.
Well, it's a perfect plan and one that I've been trying to execute for many years. But anyway, what is your next piece of content? What can we read from you in the unfortunate 7-week gap we have between races?
I'm not particularly sure. I'm not actually working on anything at the moment because unfortunately I've got too much to focus on with university. But my strategy for writing articles is basically come up with an idea and I can write one within a day or two, so that can quickly change. I'll probably write up something about the chances that Formula E teams have of winning the title, or like the progression of Formula E as a series and why it's so entertaining, or maybe just a personal experience of how I fell in love with the sport, little things like that. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to that, and keep writing the race stuff because it's really good. So, Conrad O'Keefe, that was from eracing.net, and also the Pit Crew Online. I know you're publishing pieces on that recently.
Yeah, I've got plans for different series on that. I don't put my Formula E content on there, but things like Super Formula is what I'm going to focus on next season. That's going to be my role with them, and potentially helping out with F1 content now and again.
Good to speak to you, Conrad, as ever. Now, thank you for listening to the E-Talking podcast. If you like this and want to get more, and why would you not, go to motione.org, and you may also want to consider subscribing to my Patreon exclusives on patreon.com/E_motionFE. Goodbye for now. Next time we're talking road cars, and as is mandated by law for electric vehicle podcasts, we'll be talking about that big weird truck that looks like a shoebox. Look forward to that. Thank you again, Conrad.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Bye for now.